Good morning to you. Now, this claim, whether true or not, sort of tends to draw New Zealand into a rather disturbing web. We've just heard from Paul Buchanan, who is making that point too. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's right. It is a time for caution. I mean, just to deal with the substance of it, well, I don't know. I have not been briefed on it. I see the Prime Minister's comments from a day or two ago that they have no evidence of that. I'd treat the claim with real caution. I think reports I've seen in the media tend to suggest this was well planned over some time. And yet, of course, we know the Christchurch attacks, a month or thereabouts ago. So I'd be very cautious about the substance of the claim. And I think, it is a time for us just to, in light of the allegations being made in international media and the like, to exercise real caution.
Okay, how responsible was it then for a Sri Lankan minister to stand up and say this without having strong evidence? Because you look this morning at the New York Times or the Guardian, the whole world is seeing the story that there somehow was a connection here. Are you concerned or disappointed that a minister of Sri Lanka would make such a claim without having strong evidence?
Well, ultimately, I don't know what his evidence was. If he said it without the evidence, then that would be something that we should be concerned about. I would note, it seems like in the Sri Lankan system, it is a relatively junior minister, and he's a Deputy Minister of Defence, if I'm right. And so, again, I come back to it. You wouldn't want to get too carried away with that and the substance of it without that evidence, and I just haven't had the briefing.
Does New Zealand need to front foot this? We've tried for the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and the Minister responsible for the intelligence services. None of them would come on this morning. Have they got the right approach, or should we be front footing this?
I don't know about front footing. I do think, though, the government should make its position clear. Now, if the position still is on the evidence they've seen that I haven't seen, that the media hasn't seen, that it is unfounded, that there isn't evidence to suggest a link, we should know that, and they should be clear with us about that. Because I think your point is right. Without that, there is some risk of a bit of alarm around that probably isn't warranted.
You're on the Intelligence and Security Committee, the cross-party committee that gets briefings on intelligence issues. Are you getting good briefing information on the intelligence that's coming through, or is that held more tightly just within the government? In
general terms, I do. Every month or thereabouts, I'm briefed by the security agencies, and I appreciate that. I think it's an important thing that they do to keep the Leader of the Opposition briefed. In relation to this, I wouldn't talk about any detail. Let me put it this way, I don't have any sense that I'm not being briefed.
Okay. New Zealand reduced its threat level assessment down to medium. Do you agree with that call?
Yes, it seemed to me that would be and was going to be what would happen. High is just that, it's high. I think returning to low, though, seems on the evidence wrong. There is a period where there are the risks of retaliation, there are the risks of copycatting and so on. Be very clear, I'm not suggesting that is going to happen or I have any evidence to suggest they're happening, but medium seems right. And I'd make the point overall, Guy, that whether this relatively junior Sri Lankan minister is right or not, what we can say regardless is that both of these sets of attacks in Christchurch and in Sri Lanka were attacks that were made on people going about the worship of their God. They were marks for extremism over tolerance, peace and love, and we condemn them outright all the same.
Sure. Should we, though, send a cease and desist to Sri Lankan government ministers without further evidence? Because this is going to inflame it. I mean, I'm just wondering what you think that the response should be from the New Zealand government, even if it's not with a megaphone. Should we be sending a message to them?
Yeah, I think the government's response has to be, firstly, to be clear with the New Zealand public about what the situation is. I think that is right, and we need to hear that from the government, whether Prime Minister or other ministers or appropriate personnel. I think then there is no doubt, and we saw it in fact with the Deputy Prime Minister going to Turkey, and we can have questions about how effectively he did that, but there is no doubt if the position is that our government isn't aware of evidence, that they should be seeking to have channels with Sri Lanka to discuss what the evidence is, what the situation is, why this minister has said that. Now, until I know what the answer is there, what the basis of that Sri Lankan minister's comments are, it's a bit hard for me to say what their next steps would be. I suspect, it's an evolving situation.
Just finally, we've historically had the position where the Prime Minister is responsible for the intelligence agencies. That was the historic position. That's the position that we had under Jenny Shipley or Helen Clark, or going back even further. And now we've had a situation, firstly under John Key, who farmed it out to Chris Finlayson, and then this Prime Minister who's farmed it out to Andrew Little. Do you think, in light of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, that position should be elevated back up to the 9th floor of the Beehive?
I think the truth is you can have different forms and structures, but the buck stops with the Prime Minister. The same is true in our international affairs. There may be a foreign minister, but it is the Prime Minister that's truly the foreign minister of the country. The same is true in this case in relation to our security arrangements. Look, I've been very clear, not everyone has agreed, but since the get-go of the Christchurch tragedies, that I do think we need to consider seriously upping our security arrangements.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it means going back and thinking about where we got to with TICSA legislation and with the operational requirements underneath that in terms of security.
More spying.
And making sure that we're right. Well, that may be one way to put it, but I don't believe that gets in the way of the freedoms that New Zealanders rightly cherish. But I do think, when you look at Australia, America, other countries we compare ourselves with, we should be asking and answering, are we up at their level of security arrangements? Have you done any more work
on your thinking around that? I know we talked about that previously. You talked about whether we should have gone with, what was the name of the program?
Well, Spear Gun. And what Paul Buchanan would say, and I get his point, is that, that was then and this is now. My fundamental point is not that, though. It's simply this, as technology evolves and so on, I think a basic requirement of government is keeping Kiwi safe.
So you think we should have another look at
that's what Jacinda Ardern should be doing.
Thanks for your time this morning. Do appreciate it. That is Simon Bridges, who is the leader of the National Party. It's just shy of 7:45 now.
And you're listening to Morning Report. I'm Kim Savage in for Susie Ferguson.